Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Today's guest is Lance Cayko, a serial entrepreneur, award-winning architect, builder, lecturer, and podcaster who's mastered the art of design, construction, and business success. As the co-founder of F9 Productions, Lance has built one of Colorado's leading design and build firms, specializing in single-family homes, multifamily developments, and small commercial projects. Lance's journey began with the construction trades, giving him hands-on experience before earning a bachelor's and master's degree. Beyond running a thriving business, Lance is a university lecturer, philanthropist, and the co-host of Inside the Firm podcast, where he shares game-changing insights on architecture, entrepreneurship, and small business ownership. Lance, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me here today, Lisa.
I am so excited to have a conversation. My family, my parents were real estate developers. And so I had a hard hat when I was about 3 years old and walking around construction sites. And it's important in this day and age that we talk about what's going on in construction because we have a nationwide housing shortage and costs are going through the roof. And so I am so excited to listen and learn from you about sustainability in building and design and talk about some of the things that we're doing today that would never be probably been considered viable in the past. So Lance, tell me a little bit about what you're doing with F9 Productions and why it's important today.
Yeah, we're doing something different, and I always liked to be different. I think I'm just a natural contrarian. I live my life by the law of polarity. If negative things happen, I get real excited because positive things usually happen after that. It's an actual physical law. And so our firm was started 15 years ago in the middle of the Great Recession, and we were reacting to the negativity of being laid off by business owners who put all their eggs in one basket, who weren't really good business people at all. They were just more capital A architects, trying to really cared about high design, really had trouble checking their egos at the door, had trouble picking up the phone. And so what we do at F9 is the complete opposite. We know that we're going to be good at design. I mean, we went to school. We were already award-winning architects even before we could legally call ourselves architects. That's like the default to me. And some of the biggest things that we've tried to change and then do for us and our customers is just be really good at customer service and focus on clients first. And even if it's the smallest client that maybe some of these other architects they wouldn't even take on. For example, I get a lot of calls from small business owners who get caught in the red tape web from the government. And they want to do something as simple as add an entrance door to the outside of the building, and then maybe demolish a wall and put a couple outlets up. And that will trigger the need for a building permit. Just simple stuff like that. Or they're changing occupancies from, like a hair salon over to like a little library or something like that, for example. And those are not huge money makers for us, but they do pay the bills and they keep things going. And at the end of the day, we're here to serve people with our skills that we've gained, our architectural skills, our code analysis skills, just our professional skills. So I'd say I don't poo-poo taking on those kind of clients. I love those kind of clients because they actually end up rewarding us more than with money. I mean, word of mouth is number one, but number two, we get some amazing 5-star reviews on Google. And from those clients that are just so grateful to be able to find somebody that will actually pick up the phone. And that was probably one of the first big lessons I learned when we started F9 15 years ago was I would get these calls from potential customers or emails or something. And I just distinctly remember picking up the phone and, introducing myself. Hey, F9 Productions, Lance speaking. How may I help you? And over and over again, it was shocking to hear on the other end of the line, oh my God, thank you for picking up the phone. You're like the 10th architect I've called. And I would turn to my business partner in those early years and I would go, is it this simple? Is it just picking up the phone and responding like a human being and making them feel, even if they're the smallest of our clients, that they're number one? And we've just carried that through in the past 15 years. And as a matter of fact, as we're recording this tonight, I'm taking my daughter on a daddy daughter date, and she's coming to the Best of Mile High Awards ceremony. And I think we're going to win for the third year in a row best of customer service for the whole state of Colorado architecture. And so that's kind of a way to sort of put a just a little cherry on top of my little rant there.
That is a fabulous cherry on top, and I wish you great luck. And I love that it's a daddy daughter date to go and potentially have a huge celebration. And we'll talk more about that commitment to balance and family, because it is important. But I want to talk and I want to dig into this a little bit more. Right, you are an architecture firm, and the number one thing that's had the biggest impact on you is one, answering the telephone, and two, Google reviews. Right, putting the customer first. This is a topic that I talk about and I shout from the rooftops to anybody who will listen on this podcast. I don't care what business you're in, you're serving your clients' needs. Not what you think they want, not what you think they need, but what they actually tell you they need. And that starts with answering the telephone and being there to say, "Hi, how can I help?" Not something that I'm betting a lot of architects talk about in their business model.
No, it's all about ego and inflation. And part of the problem is, and I feel like I'm a good person to be able to say this. In other words, like, it maybe the weight of what I'm about to say, there is some gusto behind it. And I teach at two different universities, North Dakota State and CU Boulder, in the architecture departments. I've taught at CU Boulder for 13 years. And so I'm not digging on exactly what I do, which is teach people how to be design architects. We're teaching design in school, but that is mostly what we're focused on, is design, because we have to make sure we have that base level there in the profession. And what happens is then we graduate these students, and we think they're like teenagers in terms of the architecture profession, or young adults, and really they're actually babies. They come out and their head's still floppy, and you're getting them to walk or crawl, and then walk, and then hopefully jog, and then run. And that's where the practitioners come in, the practicing architects. But who is teaching them business, right? Who is teaching them customer service? And only up until about maybe 10, 12 years ago was there little factions that started to be created. And a lot of it was with the rise of social media. The big shout out I would give to that would be like two of them. One, the Business of Architecture podcast, which one of my friends runs that. It's in the name, Business of Architecture. Like, this was not a thought
Yeah.
prior to podcasting, prior to the social rise in social media. And the other one would be the Entree Architect Community by Mark LePage. It's focused on small firm architects, and for the first time, in the profession, we're really taking a look back at ourselves, putting up the mirror and going, well, it's not just about this being Frank Lloyd Wright or Frank Gehry or any of these very highfalutin. And trust me, I love star architecture. I love, like, those very signature buildings, and I go to them all the time, and I gush over them and everything. But those are pretty rare, actually. And, it's the mom and pop shops that I just talked about earlier, about, like, that's how you can make meaningful impacts on people's lives, and really start to change the world just incrementally, instead of sort of this top down situation.
For the average person, we probably take for granted the role that an architect has played in our world, because it happens. I'm standing inside of my home, which was designed by an architect. You go to the grocery store, right? Every building, every structure that we interact with throughout our lifetimes was designed by an architect. And we think about the Frank Lloyd Wrights, and we think about the artistic representations of structure. But day in and day out, right, we are living and working in spaces that have been designed with form, with function, hopefully with some sustainability and a little bit of creativity to use space well, because as you said, good design is the foundation of everything. But how is it that, what should we be sharing with the audience members who aren't architects, so that they really appreciate what a good and capable architect does for them in their world that they interact in?
Yeah, sure. I think there's two examples I'll focus on. The first one, though, is again sort of this small business owner who maybe doesn't think they need an architect, but then ends up finding out that they do. What I have encountered a lot with those kind of folks is they they're misled by somebody, whether it's their landlord or the general contractor or themselves. It's usually one of those three. And to where, and maybe one of the most recent ones is like this: a general contractor
Yeah.
uh, goes in and tells, we'll call her Kelly, this gal that we just helped out that with her project, the general contractor is like, oh, you don't need an architect for this. It was a commercial building. They were doing exactly what I was saying earlier, putting a door in the outside of a building,
Mhm.
demoing a wall, doing some basic electrical stuff. And he puts together a little sketch and goes into the building department and thinks he's going to come out in the same hour with a building permit. And the building department goes, you need an architect. And then the contractor sheepishly goes back to the owner and goes, well, the city's saying this. It's like, yeah, I mean, you could have been proactive about it. So what does that mean for an owner? Here's my message to anybody who's ever thinking about doing any kind of small business, and they think they can just move in or out. Is like, please reach out to an architect. Please reach out to the city and actually ask them, describe in detail what you're going to do. Just be open and honest about it, and ask them if you absolutely need an architect for this. Because sometimes just with the change of occupancy, like I talked about earlier, where they change from one business to the other, then the city wants to review like a life safety plan and just make sure that we're all good to go, and that this is going to be a safe environment for the general public. What it equates to is, if you don't do that, is potentially ruining your business actually before you're even able to open, because a lot of folks will sign these leases and thinking that they're going to be open within 90 days. And there's a lot of details in those leases where they got to start paying rent, right? And maybe
Yeah.
they're not, maybe because they went down this bad path, they've already wasted those 90 days. So really, they're not open for 6 months. This is what I'm trying. This is how architects actually can just number first, the very first, the most simple way they can help save you money. And then the other one would be just in your house. I think we should consider the health of our houses in a different way, especially if it just comes to like light and air and being able to see outside and having a healthy environment. A lot of my colleagues that I went to school with, they went and worked at these huge firms, and they're doing huge public work, right? And we do, like you said earlier, Lisa, we do custom single family, we do multifamily, we do light commercial. We're a boutique firm. We do like a lot of builder level houses and stuff like that. And we're actually really grateful when we get to hired by a builder who's going to replicate them like 100 times. Because I'm like, oh, if we nail the floor plans, this is one of the most sustainable things we could do, because now we're not tearing down walls in like 10, 20 years, right? With all that embodied carbon. But those other architects that I went to school with, they would, we'd have this annual fishing trip, and they would poo poo what we do, and they would be like, "Wow, your architecture only, our architecture is affecting like the public and the masses and everything." I go, "Yeah, but our architecture, like, you could be born in the house, you could die in the house, you're going to be having some of your toughest decisions ever made in your life at the kitchen table." So I really think architects in being involved in residential architecture, even if it is builder level houses, can make a huge difference in people's lives.
I think that it's an absolutely great point, and I want to play with it a little bit because things are changing. How we live is changing a little bit. In the United States, in my lifetime, we never really talked about like generational living.
Mm.
There was a point in time in my family in the past that the family farm and my great grandparents and my grandparents and many generations lived in a space. But in my lifetime, we really don't do that. But it's starting to change because we are bringing elders into our homes and we are building generational suites and different things. And so taking the time and care to plan for, yeah, it's not 20 years, but it could be 60 to 80 years of time where the family is going to be in this space. And how we build, the materials we build with, how we design light and air, these are important aspects of that. When you have the ability to think on one of those builder level projects, when you're thinking long term, what are some of those factors that are maybe new and different that in the homes we're living in, you would do differently in future builds and designs?
Oh, great question. I think we're trying to find the gooey middle lately. In the early 90s, or in the 90s and like the early 2000s, we had this McMansion
Yep.
effect going on in the United States, right? And I always think about like when people are doing something, it's sort of back to like, well, why that was a reaction to something.
Yep.
So clearly they were reacting to maybe these compartmentalized spaces in houses where everything was cut up in little rooms in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah.
And then you layer on the idea that we have engineered lumber emerging in the 90s and the early 2000s where it would allow us to span greater distances so we could have more open floor plans. And then the idea was is somehow like more is more actually. It doesn't mean more is better. And now we're sort of seeing the reaction to that where we're having, well, the tiny house movement was huge in the 2010s. I mean, we were a part of it. We designed and built a tiny house that put us on HGTV. It's called the Atlas Tiny House. It was we were reacting to other people who were doing tiny houses, which were reacting to these huge McMansions and these huge mortgages in the dot and the real estate bubble in 2008 and 2009 that caused a Great Recession. And we saw these little tiny houses as like, well, people were building them, but they looked like little cabins. And I was like, well, we could, I mean, they're confined. It was like, well, what about what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that, what we explored and did and designed and built was these tiny houses that could fold. So like the deck would fold up and protect the glass. And we had this
Mm.
huge glass wall and it would fold down and expand your living space by like 2x, big glass sliding windows and doors and fully self-contained and all of that kind of stuff. And now I think we're coming back to developments where there is a less is more approach
Mhm.
to it, where we're trying to really come up with ideas for housing that we don't have to do this over 2,000 square foot house anymore. We can do something between 1,000 and 2,000 square feet. And the one that was really starting to take off here in Colorado is the ADU movement, so the accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah.
And what that is like a mother-in-law house, right? So like you have a matter of fact, the governor last May, just signed into law the every parcel of land that's zoned residential in Colorado, you have to allow at least one more dwelling unit. And the cities are coming up with their own little laws based on that, but they have to follow the law, the letter of the law there. And we've been doing a ton of them, and they're really fun projects because they're like between 500 and 1,000 square feet, between 1 and 2 bedrooms. And you talked about multi-generational living. A lot of them are baby boomers who are they're living with their children, and the children are going, I love having you around, but maybe not that close. Maybe just in the backyard. And plus, then the mom or the dad, the baby boomer mom, they're like, "Yep, I would like my own place too." And it's really a beautiful thing that's coming about. So that's probably one of the most exciting typologies I'm excited about is additional dwelling units, these little carriage houses in the back of a property, your typical suburban property in Colorado.
I did not know that Colorado had had that law in place, and I think it is a beautiful thing because autonomy and independence is important. Nobody wants to feel like a burden, and a separate dwelling gives that space, that distance, and yet still has family close enough where that if something catastrophic happens, you are literally across the yard. Lance, will you talk to me about one of the projects that was the most challenging and frustrating for you?
Oh yeah, probably the second tiny houses that we built. So we built this. We The first tiny house that we built, it was actually called Blake's Tiny House, and it was kind of a joke leading up to us actually building it with one of our friends. And he entertained the idea for a long time, and then he was like, "Guys, I'm not really building this." And I go, "Okay, all right, well, we're gonna build it because we're completionists." And we had really caught on to this wave of these tiny houses that were going to they did take off. I mean, there's television shows. We were on one of the first ones. We would get calls. The website was so good. We would get calls every like month. NBC, CBS, HGTV eventually hit, and we designed it. We built it. We won an Architizer award, and then it kind of went viral because we got into Dwell magazine too. And so then Subaru called us about a year later, and they go, "Hey, we love this concept. Nobody's done this before. You guys with this foldable tiny house where it's like a transformer house on
Mm.
wheels. and we can't build it, but obviously you guys can. Would you build 2 of them for us? And when they need to be each 50% bigger, like double the decks. Plus, on top, we want to put a deck that could fold up and fold down with railings and stairs because we're gonna put rock bands on there. And I go, oh, you are okay. And my business partner goes, who I have more construction experience than him. He has enough,
Yeah.
and he was the one that got us on the HGTV. He was the one that then also took this lead with Subaru, and he was all excited about it. And he goes to me and he goes, "Should we? Let's do it." And I go, "No, like that first one was very, very. The first one was like so hard. I mean, we are inventing an
Mm.
engine. We were totally inventing something, and I know we were because like first of all, there wasn't any out there, and then we've had copycats since then, and I'm always flattered by copycats. So he goes, well, what if I tell him this number? And I go, dude, if you tell him that number and they go for it, and this was 2016, 2017.
Okay.
And I said, if they go for that, there's nothing my wife could even say. Like, she will just have to bite her tongue and we get this done. Because our end goal was to finally get enough cash to buy a piece of property and become full-fledged real estate developers. So that I saw that as our way out. And the deadline sucked. So they signed the contract. They didn't blink. It's Subaru, and the deadline sucked. We were working night and day. It was physically grueling. It was so hard because like you're ordering like special springs and stuff. I
Mm.
mean, all of these we were making our own hidden doors. It was just wild. And but we finished it. It was nerve-wracking. Al had his first baby during the build, which ended up he's alive now. The
I
baby's
was kind
fine,
of
but
hoping it was
like
Al's wife.
oh yes, Al's wife. I'm sorry. Al's wife had the baby. Thank you for that correction. Yes, Al was just a bystander. But the baby got flown in a helicopter and all kinds of stuff. It was just awful. The baby's fine. Everything's fine. They're super healthy. And that was the hardest build. That was one of the hardest ones. But it reminds, like, in hindsight, I just love that kind of stuff because I'm positively talking about it now, and it's like, well, it's like it was like a lump of coal. It had to go through intense heat and pressure to have this diamond come out. It was one of our most successful projects in terms of notoriety, capability. They're beautiful. They got seen by like hundreds of thousands of people because they toured them around the country. And then we got our nest egg and we bought our piece of land, and we made our first real estate development. So it all worked out. And I'm glad we bit that off. But that was definitely our hardest project.
Thank you for sharing that story. All levels of it were informative and a smidge entertaining along the way. If people's curiosity is piqued by the conversation we've been having today, Lance, where can they learn more about you, about F9, about the podcast?
Yeah, 3 different places. We'll start with the podcast. They can go to insidethefirmpodcast.com. They can follow us if you want to watch on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, whatever major platform you like. If you want to keep up with everything at F9, you go to f9productions.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. We send out a newsletter every month. Keep up with what we're doing, designing, building, etc. And then last place would be LinkedIn. Go to LinkedIn. I'm the only Lance Cayko, Cayko. That's LanceCayko, and I will link it with you.
Fantastic. And links will be in the show notes for the audience, so it's easy for them to find. We have had a fabulous conversation today, and starting with Lance's journey and his desire to respond to polarity. Everything that may be negative is on its path to becoming positive. And that is a wonderful place to start, and how his business grew during the Great Recession into something that has had game-changing impact for small businesses, and even just in the space of design in the tiny homes and the things that we've just described recently. The business grew out of a reaction to the recession, being laid off. And the foundational elements that Lance and his team start with is good design is assumed. Right? What we do beyond that and how we serve our clients is what is the key differentiator that makes a difference. Answering the phone, Google reviews are the types of things that amplify word of mouth to make a business grow and scale. And audience members, the one piece of advice that we left with is, if you're thinking that you're going to be doing something to the structure of your business, speak with an architect first. We can shortcut the headaches if you really and truly understand what needs to be done. Lance, fantastic conversation today. Thank you for being here. Audience, you know my rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show.